Alright, hello everyone again. We're going to go on to our second vocab word here, line. So let's start with our objective here. Um, what are we going to be trying to do is we're going to be able to use and identify basic shapes and terms in geometry. How we're going to do this? Again, you have the ability to pause, fast forward, rewind this video however you see fit. Um, there's going to be at the end a couple examples, and I'm not going to do every single little bit. So if you want to continue practicing with some of these, you are absolutely free to do it. There's going to be some extra ways to do what we're doing, and you can just go ahead and do that. Um, and why are we doing this? Again, in order to be able to communicate in the language of mathematics, we need to know what the words mean and be able to use them. So today we're going to learn how to effectively use the word line. So when we're talking about a line, we're talking about what we would call a one-dimensional object. So last time with points, we were talking about zero-dimensional object, something that had no length, no width, no height, no actual measurable amount of anything. It's just a spot to say, hey, here I am. But with a line, it has actual structure to it. It has, we would say that it has a length. So it has no width or height, but it does have a length. So one dimension. And basically, it's a path composed of infinitely many points, and it's a straight path. So when we are talking about a straight line, we really don't need to say a straight line because all lines are straight. If we, look at something like this, where it's got sort of a wibble wobble to it, we wouldn't call that a line, we would call that a curve. And curves are not something that we're going to be talking about at all. So we can just sort of be all up on the straight line and just call it a line. We don't need to say, oh, it's straight too. Um, and then the other important thing about a line specifically is that a line has no beginning and no end. It actually goes on forever in either direction, and when we are doing it, we put arrows on the ends so that we can see that it keeps going. It would actually continue all the way and off the page in both directions. We don't have to draw the whole thing, but we sure can infer it with these arrows on the end. Now I've got a little bit of a drawing right here. This is actually two different lines. You'll notice this one going this way, and then you've got a second line going this way. Um, generally speaking, on a line, we really only care about 2 points. So going through, like, if there's like 5, 6 points, it doesn't really matter which ones you pick. Here I've got A and B on this line, and so I could call it line AB. I could call it line BA. If there's an E on here or something, let's actually make it do the thing I want it to do. If there's like an E on here, I now have a bunch of different ways. I could call it line AE, line EA, line EB, line BE, line AB, line BA. It doesn't matter the order. It's just, we pick two lines. We pick 2 points on the line so that we can just name it. And the reason we use 2 points is because through any 2 points, there only ever exists one line. We couldn't find a way to take a point here and a point here and draw 2 different lines through it. Like if I went through and I drew one line right here, here's one line through, and then I tried to draw a second line, I wouldn't be able to do it because it would be the same thing. If I tried to draw, like I'll start out here and I'll try and draw that, and I'll continue, and I need to make it hit the other point too. Well, look, now it's not a line anymore, because remember we talked about back here, we don't want it wibble wobble. That's not a line. This is a curve, right? Call it curve. That's a curve, not a line. And so here, the one here in black, that's a line. But if we tried to draw any other anything through those 2 points that wasn't the exact same thing as this, we'd get something that is not a line. And that's sort of the important thing right there. And we will end up talking a lot more about this and a bunch of other things related to it at a later date. But yeah, so basically, as long as you pick 2 points that are on that line, and you can name it that way. Now, when we are writing, nobody wants to actually write out the word line like this when you're doing your homework and stuff. And so the way that we show that we're dealing with a line and not any other type of structure, like what we'll talk about later, is we put this little hat on top. You see how it's a little line and it's got the arrows going, and that's how we know that this is a line and not a line segment or array or what have you, anything else that would be named with 2 points. So when we're talking, if I'm just out there saying words and I say line BA, you know what you're talking about. If I'm writing it down just so that we're always clear, if I wanted to say line BA instead of going through and writing out all the words and stuff, we can just put a little hat on top of it like that. Make sure you've got the arrows going in both directions, and when you are looking at this and reading it, you just the word line, that's what that little hat allows you to understand. Now, one other thing to be aware is sometimes, especially when you're dealing with big diagrams where it's not just a little thing like this, having 50 billion points on the diagram is not helpful or useful because it makes it hard to read. So what I've seen done, and you'll see it every once in a while, it'll depend on who's doing the writing and all of that, but sometimes you'll see like a little cursive letter down here on the end or something like that. It'll be an L, an M, or an N. Those middle letters, in the middle of the alphabet. And you could, instead of calling a line by 2 points on the line, you can use this designation that they give it. So you could say that this is line CA or line AC, but you could also call it line L. And that's okay. You're never going to be required to call it one thing versus the other if you have a choice, but it's good to recognize when you've got one designation or when you've got another designation. So what I have here as our final little thing before we go is a little exercise here. There's many different ways that you could call this. Many different ways that you shouldn't call it. Like for example, let's start with a should or a could here. Any two points on this line that you like, you can use. For example, you could call it line B, C. Or you could call it line A, D. Or any combination in any order. So these are the yes here. But when it comes to names that you can't use, see this E right here? That's not on the line at all. That's not on the line at all. So you can't use that point to name this line. You can't call it, for example, line B, E. That doesn't work. Those points are not both on the line. So here's a, I don't like that color right now because we've got that color elsewhere. Let's use a dark blue. So here, no, don't use E, right? E is bad. Don't use it. It's not on the line here. You can't. You can't use E to name this line up here. But remember, we talked about on the last slide, C right here, or we call it right here, line L, you could call it whatever letters here. If it's an L, you can call it line L. Let's erase that, and we can use a different letter. It doesn't matter. It's just whatever the person writing the problem decides on. So the actual letter itself is let's call it a Q. Let's make a Q. That's a great thing to try and draw on a screen. Q. So you could also, in addition to naming it with its two-letter designation like this, line BC or line AD or CB or what have you, you could also call it line, that's vague attempt at cursive there. Now what did I call it? I called it a Q. I was about to use an L again. Don't want to use that. It's a Q. See, it's a Q. Use a Q when it's a Q. Use an L when it's an L. Use a B when it's a B. A J when it's a J. Whatever it is. Use that. So basically, there's lots of different ways that you can name any given structure here. If it's a point on the line, you're welcome to and allowed to use that point for naming the line. Or if there's a designation out here off to the side, usually it'll be in cursive, by the way. So I'm not just sort of doing it in cursive to try and be fancy, or because it doesn't look very good, but that's neither here nor there. But it'll usually be in cursive just because, again, it's just sort of the way that they do it. So if there's like a little designation out here, it shouldn't be a point. Like here, you can't just call it line A. If you're going to use the point way, you got to use 2 points. If there's just like a little letter hanging off to the side, trying to be cool and on the edge there, then you can use that letter as its name as a separate thing. Like there's no point Q that we have marked on the line. So don't get that twisted there. All right. We will see you next time.